Gary Lineker is reportedly set to return to our TV screens this coming weekend amid speculation that he and the BBC are close to resolving their impartiality row.
The BBC's weekend football coverage was disrupted due to walkouts triggered by the Match of the Day host suspension. Did the BBC make the right decision in taking him off air? We're joined now by the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Jonathan. Are you a Leicester fan as well?
Well, it wasn't a great result for Leicester this weekend, although Gary Lineker was mobbed at the ground at the King Power Stadium when he turned up there, and he's, of course, a big Leicester City fan.
Were you at the ground?
No, I wasn't, but I saw the pictures on Twitter, and I saw, as you'd expect, I also follow a lot of Leicester people on my Twitter account, and I saw all kinds of people tweeting pictures of Gary and expressing their support for Gary Lineker.
Let me put this to you. There are people getting in touch this morning who say they pay the licence fee. So they pay Gary Lineker's wages. They do not want him expressing a particularly controversial political opinion when they're paid for by, effectively, the taxpayer. What do you say to those viewers?
Well, of course, he was expressing his opinion on Twitter in his own time. He wasn't expressing his opinion on Match of the Day. I think the broader issue, though, is that the handling of this has been, frankly, catastrophic. It's a real mess. We've seen football fans not being able to get the coverage of football over this weekend that they would usually expect. It looks like the BBC did cave into pressure from very loudmouth backbench Tory MPs on this. And, of course, it's now reignited questions about the impartiality of the chair of the BBC, who we know tried to arrange, or helped arrange, a very substantial donation to Boris Johnson. So it's a complete mess. I do hope it gets resolved today, but there are clearly big questions for the BBC and the chair of the BBC as to how this mess was allowed to descend into this absolute chaos that we've seen.
Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, did say last week that he thought Gary Lineker was wrong to use the language he used. He said comparisons with Germany in the 1930s aren't always the best way to make one's argument. Do you think Gary Lineker overstepped the mark in terms of what he said?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would not have endorsed the language that Gary Lineker used in that tweet. And I don't think anybody is defending that tweet. But what people are deeply concerned about is the way in which the BBC reacted by taking him off air, which in turn led to the absolute catastrophe of all kinds of football coverage collapsing this weekend. And there were serious questions about the BBC's strategy, not just the chair, whose position looks increasingly untenable, of course, but why are other personalities allowed to tweet in very explicit terms, but are not taken off air? I mean, I don't want Alan Sugar taken off air, by the way. Don't get me wrong. No. But he has expressed all kinds of very strong political opinions on his Twitter account in his private time as well.
Exactly, that's a fair point. Can I ask you as well about the substance of the policy last week? There were football fans at the Leicester game holding up signs saying, "We're with Gary, we welcome migrants." Does that suggest that there are people backing Gary Lineker because they think that trying to stop the small boats policy is the right thing to do? And is that the Labour view?
I think people are concerned about some of the language that we've seen from the Conservative politicians in recent times. It's not just, by the way, Leicester City fans or Labour politicians. It's also prominent Conservatives like George Osborne who've expressed concern about the language from Conservative figures. Look, in the end, you've got to have security at our borders, and we all need to deal, or politicians need to deal with crossings, but you've also got to have an asylum system that works. The problem with the government's legislation is that, well, 9 months ago, they had another piece of legislation where they said they were going to stop the crossings. That piece of legislation didn't work. And this piece of legislation is effectively a con, because it will not deal with those crossings. It will not deal with the fact that we have a huge backlog in asylum claims. And fundamentally, it will not deal with the criminal gangs. We should smash the gangs.
Okay.
But you've got Tory MPs saying, oh, you know, you can't do anything about these gangs. Well, that's giving in to these villains and criminals. That's not good enough.
OK, just want to ask you one quick question about the junior doctors' strike. It began at 7 o'clock, hugely worrying for anyone who might be going into hospital for any reason. What would you say to the unions, to the BMA? I mean, the Health Secretary has offered talks. They've been rejected.
Well, I mean, the ministers have got to open up into a serious, meaningful negotiation with health unions. We've seen thousands of operations cancelled across the whole of the NHS throughout this industrial action.
Would you tell the British Medical Association to take the offer of talks and call off the strike action for the time being?
Well, I don't think that the BMA do not think that what is on offer is serious. What they need to be invited into a proper, meaningful negotiation, and ministers need to get on with that.
Does that mean the nurses are wrong to be in discussions? Because the nurses clearly think the Health Secretary is serious about talks.
Well, that's because the nurses have been offered a different process. And that's the thing here. The BMA needs to be offered a sensible process, a proper process, which is meaningful. They don't think that has been offered. It doesn't look like that's been offered to me. It's a different process to the other health unions. And look, Rishi Sunak can't bury his head in the sand on this. This is going to impact patients. I don't want to see strikes go ahead in the NHS today. I want to see those strikes pulled and proper discussions take place. But that, in the end, is up to the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister to get on with it and engage in a meaningful negotiation.
Jonathan Ashworth, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Thank you.